capitalizing on the synergy between processes and technology to drive up individual and team performance and help realize their potential. His passion is focused on understanding what makes people act the way they do and how cultural differences impact this. He satisfied that passion by working with international organizations, including World Bank and Sony Music. He was also even a technical consultant for the UK's government-sponsored personnel standards. He lectures internationally on the power of integrated HR processes and technology, and he thanks us all for the opportunity to come again to Israel. Mr. Clinton Weingrove.
Thank you, Yoram. Good morning, everyone. Are you having fun? Good. Thank you for allowing me to speak in English, although I don't think you had a vote on it. But you'll be glad because my Hebrew extends to about 4 words, which wouldn't have added much value, would it? So thank you for that. HR is my passion. Many years ago, I joined Mefilät as a result of a research project when I was working with Minnesota mining manufacturing company 3M. And they asked me to research Europe and the world, which tells you something about their knowledge of grammar and geography, and find the best practice in performance management. I joined Mefilät, told my wife that I was leaving the 23rd largest company in the world to double the UK workforce of another, and she recovered from the shock recently because that was 1988. So I've spent nearly 24 years with Mefilät, which means in a year's time I will be officially antique. And I have 3 clients in the US who weren't born when I joined Mefilät, which I guess defines experience. So I'm going to try and share with you today why I'm excited about HR. I believe that we are this very time facing a huge challenge. If ever companies in the world needed HR, now is it. So half of you here, I believe, hold the future of your organizations in your hands. The other half here are consultants and vendors, and our job is not to compete with each other. Our job is to help you succeed. So I'm hoping that through today we'll share that experience. What experience do we bring from Mefilät? I represent Mefilät HR Solutions, which largely operates in the Americas and in Europe. And we specialize in working with organizations trying to push the boundary, trying to do something new, trying to drive those new strategies, trying to use technology, trying to use data to really make a difference. And I'm just going to share with you some perspectives and leave you with 10 thoughts about what you might do if global HR is your area. I'm not going to tell you you need to learn the local legislation. Of course you do. I'm not going to tell you you need great recruitment processes. Of course you do. I'm going to try and talk about what you need as people. What do you need to be when you wake up in the morning? What are your organizations looking for when they look at HR for inspiration? So, what's driving organizations to go global? What's the context? You know, we are clearly in volatile financial situation. Congratulations, Israel, for not yet suffering the significant effects that our poor colleagues like Greece, Portugal, Spain, and Italy are suffering. But globally, there are clearly major changes in the way in which finance operates, the way in which countries finance their operations, the way in which organizations fund their operations, right down to the way in which individual organizations are managing the budgets themselves. The speed of change is increasing exponentially. And if you go out onto YouTube and do a search for exponential, there's a series of 8 lectures on the consequences of exponential change, how it drives an incredible level of instability, which in the excitement of change we often don't foresee. The underdeveloped nations are catching up. There was a time when we were heading away from them, but the underdeveloped nations are catching up. And even in the last 12 months, we've seen dramatic improvements in sub-Sahara Africa in terms of how they are now envying the growth and the change in China and India. And this is placing huge amounts of pressure on us. And it's questionable whether we are now leading global change or whether, in fact, those underdeveloped nations, because of the pressure they're putting on us, is causing the change. We're seeing increasing competition over everything. Competition for people, competition for market share. Competition in everything is increasing. And of course, if there was a magic solution, I certainly wouldn't be here today. I'd be on my yacht entertaining a few of you. Products and processes can be easily copied. You know, we used to complain about how when you went to Hong Kong, everything was copied. You know, the handbags and the watches and so on. Everything can be copied now. The only thing you can't copy is the people. So in HR, we have the one asset that is immensely difficult to copy. And if you believe that your technology and your latest thinking and your book can't be copied, you know, you're clearly living in cloud cuckoo land. And then we see the increase in the mergers and acquisitions, larger organizations constantly trying to get that bigger momentum, that bigger reach, and that bigger exposure. So that's the challenge that we're facing. And a fascinating video, if you go out on TED and look at this from Ian Goldin, he says, we shouldn't be worrying quite so much about next year. We've already taken most of the actions we can do that will affect that. What we need to be thinking about is, where are we really going? What's it going to look like? So, you know, in 2030, we've got this incredible instability that's likely to arise because we are integrating such widely disparate cultures with widely differing expectations and needs, with totally different value systems. We're seeing revolutionary technologies. Only last week it was announced that they've now actually proven that you can increase people's ability to remember and recall things through, I think they call it transcranial direct current stimulation. We can now electromagnetically change the way people's brains work. I mean, that's scary. Last week, in terms of technology, they found that it's possible now, by connecting sensors to the brain, to actually make a device speak the words that you are thinking. Huge medical implications, but that's the type of technology that in the background is pushing behind organizations. Medical miracles and ethical dilemmas. The speed at which we are able to extend life is matched by the cost of that extension, but it's also matched by a rapidly reducing number of people working and able to pay for it. The current process of increasing lifespan is not sustainable with the commercial framework that we have in the world. New dynamics in aging and migration. We're seeing extension of life expectancy in the parts of the world with the highest birth rates. The parts of the world who think they run the world, us guys, our birth rates are actually falling. So we're going to see, not can we allow migration, it will be a survival necessity simply because of the way in which things are mapping out. We're seeing global systemic risk, where as we become more mobile, we cross boundaries, we're seeing the potential for major impacts. We've seen how changes in one spot rippled dramatically across the entire world in terms of finance. We've seen the risk of pandemics increasing. As our world becomes technically smaller, that will grow. And of course, there is this huge battle around, are our attempts to support economic and ecosystems, are they going to lead to success, or actually will they lead to financial collapse and social disorder? So how do we cope with that? And I give credit to what I cover with you this morning, to a wide raft of organizations, analysts like Bursin and Forrester, research organizations like Global HR, some content from Aberdeen and so on. I want to pull together some of that thinking. And one of the things that's happened is lots of organizations are saying, if you're going to go global, what seems to characterize the success? What characterizes organizations that go global and actually works? Interesting, the number one consensus is you manage costs. If you are attempting to go global, You've got to have your cost base under control. It's no good extending out globally and then attempting to control it. Something about grow the business. There's the belief that if we go global, by definition, the business gets bigger. But actually, it can be bigger when you acquire or when you merge, but very rapidly it can shrink if you don't have control over how that business operates. So it's something about having clear ideas about how you're going to grow the business, and how are you going to do that in each of those globally extended locations. There's something about brand management, and brand management isn't as the Americans thought it was back in the 80s. Back in the 80s, American companies thought that brand management and globalization was about sending a memo out to the local companies saying, with effect from the 1st of July, these are your leadership competencies, these are the values that you will have, welcome to our wonderful company. People are realizing now that brand management is much more than that. If you're going to be successful on a global platform, you have to have employees who actually believe in their heart that they are part of that organization, but you have to do it in a way that recognizes the local culture, the local sensitivities, and the local market in which they operate. And in HR, we need to understand that. I've seen so many HR departments devise these wonderful processes and schemes and initiatives and roll them out. And you can almost see the people in the receiving countries going, what? I don't know what the Hebrew for that is. So we've got to understand brand management. There's something about enhancing performance. Again, there is often an assumption that with growth comes goodness, comes results, etc. You have to have a discipline structure that says, as we go global, we are going to focus on execution. We are going to focus on improving the performance with local accountability. This is not about somebody in Denver being responsible for what happens in Hong Kong. It's about finding someone in Hong Kong who believes in what they're doing in Hong Kong and believes in being part of the organization operating in Denver. And it's something about a collaborative culture with minimal boundaries. It's about developing processes where people feel engaged, they collaborate, and we don't have the instances where there are cultural differences causing clashes. And frequently, we don't do enough to ensure that those differences are respected and valued rather than becoming a problem. We have to have knowledge collection and sharing of information, and this isn't about huge databases where people can post stuff. We have to develop across organizations agility to share information. And again, many of us have come from an HR where actually it was secret. Do you remember those smoke-filled rooms where we discussed Fred and Julie and decided the fate of each of them? Now, in the global world, we have to have environments where people can talk to each other, share information which historically we would have considered unacceptable for them to share. And that means we have to have data and we have to have return on investment-based decision-making. And this afternoon in one of the tracks, Eitan and I will be sharing some of the issues around data, cross-global data, and technology that you can use. So if they're the drivers, where does HR stand in its reputation in organizations? And again, we accumulated lots of information about how HR is viewed in some organizations. And of course, if I ask for the show of hands as to who are the exceptions, you are all the exceptions. But this is what we perceive. But in many organizations, HR is viewed as the place that you go to blame things on. We're pilloried. In many organizations, we are viewed as the people who come along behind the strategy and we help. You know, we're at the back sort of trying to help everything along. And of course, in many organizations, historically, HR has been the puppet. The strings were pulled and we did what was done. So what is the story of HR? And many of you will have come across the article back in 2005, Why We Hate HR in Fast Company. And in fact, last year I was asked at the SHRM annual conference to do a presentation on why destroy HR. So clearly there are those who believe HR is a problem. It's interesting if we look at what's happening in Europe and in the US. HR in many organizations is taking the knock during the financial recession. We're experiencing the cut at the very time when our work is increasing because we're helping organizations cope with things. HR has suffered some of the largest cuts. And yet, if we're going to achieve, if we're going to get the performance, we need great people in HR. Repeatedly, surveys have been done in terms of what careers people want to take. HR still doesn't appear in the top 10 of chosen careers. We have to change that. We have to change that when we leave this room. If we're going to make an impact on businesses, people have got to want to be in HR because they see that we can actually make a difference. Again, if we look at managers' impressions, this is a survey conducted only the back end of last year across the US and in Europe. How do operational managers faced with economic crisis view HR? This is a summary. Tolerated as it helps, but never quite meets expectations was one of the very significant comments. What you see there, it's interesting, yeah? Number 6, the orange segment is crucial to business success. We have to get that figure up. And it's no good saying, give us the seat on the board, involve us in things. We have to do that ourselves. And I guess that's one of my main messages for this morning. So where are we seen to be falling short? I've picked a number of areas to look at where many CEOs, many COOs, many line managers, those operating in global organizations where they're overseas looking back for support, where do they see the shortfalls? What they're saying is in many organizations, we still link recruitment to revenue and profit, rather than looking ahead at what do we need next year, the year after, the year after. And in some organizations, that's critical. I've got oil companies in Houston where actually they have to be influencing the education of high school students because they need them coming out with the technical skills in 6, 7, 8 years' time. In Rolls-Royce, where a project starts and doesn't finish for 25 years, you can't have a short-term view. Recruiting to fit, number of organizations that recruit people based on fit. We need good people that fit. And yet the people they recruit don't fit the organization. What are we doing? We're hoping that by bringing in a new blood, it will change the organization. That's a trivial view of the problem. Moving the wrong people across cultural boundaries. Many organizations putting people abroad without thinking about what are the success criteria? What's going to help somebody to succeed? The assumption is that you can move people from England to the US. I mean, we speak the same language, don't we? Well, roughly. And there'll be a success. Even the move from England to the US is traumatic for many people. Winston Churchill said, we're two nations divided by a common language. Onboarding, in companies, we need people to hit the ground running. I mean, I can remember head of management training and development back in 1980, and we used to have 3-week and 4-week onboarding programs. What? You want someone to hit the ground running this afternoon? So we've got to get out of beefing people up and saying, congratulations, you got the job because you're good at. We need to make sure that by the night of the first day in the new role, they understand the things that might lose them the job, the things that they've got to fix if they're going to be successful. That's a critical need. We've got to stop excusing dysfunctional behavior. Yeah, I know the CEO is fill in your Hebrew words, but he brought the results. Senior people who bring the results at the cost of people do the company long-term serious damage. So these are some of the things that we're seeing. Planning succession based on indefensible data. We see in companies. I ask companies, do you have an appraisal system? And they say, oh, yes. And I say, do you have harsh and lenient managers? And they go, oh, of course we do. And I say, so the ratings on performance then are not that reliable. And they go, yeah. And I say, how do you plan succession? And they say, oh, we ask the managers to assess potential. And I say, so your managers can't measure reliably performance they see every day, but you trust their judgment on what performance by that same person will be like in 5 years' time? I mean, that is frankly outrageous. Now, you say, but measuring potential is difficult. You know what? Suck it up. That's the problem we in HR have to solve. On performance management, we are automating today processes that didn't work in 1954 when Drucker wrote his book about the principles of management. We are trivializing performance management. I see organizations saying, managers find it so difficult, let's make it simple and easy. Guess what? Management isn't simple. Management isn't easy. If you want to be a manager, act like a manager. We are not going to spend money on toys just to make you happy. We've got to go out and make a difference. So we've got to address in performance management the fundamental issues. How do we tell people what matters? How do we explain to them that performance is their problem, not HR's? How do we get them to plan performance in a way that's really going to drive it up 24/7? How many of you got children? Hands up. Yeah, but this is an exercise, yeah? Okay, keep your hand up if you've ever fundamentally changed their behavior by having a 1-hour interview and pinning a summary on the bedroom door. Yeah. So why do you think it's going to work with managers and executives? That isn't how you change performance. So we've got to stop believing that this is something that can be simple. It has to be easy. So one of my messages to you is, we don't need things to be literally simple. We need them to be easy, but our job is to make them effective. And then compensation. The number of organizations who have forced distributions, ranking schemes, and so on to compute compensation awards because they weren't prepared to go back and fix the quality of the data on which the compensation was based. Not matching rewards with what we really value. I worked with a bank, retail banking chain, not in Israel, where I'm sure they're much better, where they invested millions in training the branch managers in how to serve the customer. And then what did they reward? Pure profit. So what did those managers do? They hoped that people would go overdrawn. They sent them letters telling them they were overdrawn, and they charged them for it. So as a consequence, the managers who actually got the rewards were the very managers who didn't deliver the customer service. And we were able to prove it. And again, Etan this afternoon will talk about how you can prove simple things with very basic data. And assuming that financial rewards are the primary incentives. One of the top-selling books on Amazon last year was by Dr. Paul Marciano, a book called Carrots and Sticks Don't Work, where he called on research that shows that in many organizations, incentive schemes are flawed at their very design. Of course, they'll give the money to the best performers, but that's not what we mean by incentive. What we mean by incentive is that people will get better. So proving that your scheme gave the money to the top performers does not prove that it increased performance, which is what we have to do. So they're just 3 areas. So what's the global people change? What's happening in the world that we have to cope with? Increasing communications. They reckon the average 21 to 24-year-old now has 200 electronic communications a day as a minimum. In 1954, when the theories on which most of our performance management systems are based, the average number of communications period that a person had was estimated at 6. That was physical, because you sat in your cube, you did as you were told, you went to lunch, you came back, and then you went home at 5 o'clock, and if you were lucky, you were paid at the end of the month. So the whole nature is changing. Increasing mobility. Again, if we go back to the early 80s, for someone joining the workforce to have already traveled abroad, apart from with the family on vacation, was an exception. Now people have traveled all over the world. Yeah? Mobility is an increasing factor, and it's going to become a survival issue. The changing locus of power. We saw recently in the UK someone have their knighthood removed. And everybody goes, well, it was a formal process and it should have happened. No, it happened because of the internet. It happened because of the outrage. It happened because people have power. Yeah? One of the major internet organizations last year, while someone was being terminated, they were twittering it to the world. Yeah? You'll never guess what he's just told me. I am being fired. The locus of power in an organization is changing. In HR, we have to understand that. Processes and procedures and policies are no longer driving the organization. Changing expectations. People don't expect a job for life now. People don't expect that everything is going to be wonderful. But as a consequence, what they give back is changing. And the increasing diversity where we're seeing the culture clashes, there is clear and demonstrable evidence that many mergers and acquisitions that fail, and a significant percentage do, fail because of the failure to bring together the cultures, not because of the financial or the business due diligence. And with the falling Western birth rates, we will see major migration of workforces, which will bring those things much closer to home. So what we've seen is faith in leadership and management has deteriorated. No longer do people respect you just because you're a manager. Employee loyalty has gone and reducing. Yeah? We're seeing management control reducing fast, and managers saying, I can't control those people. Guess what? Your job isn't to control those people anymore. Your job is to inspire and engage and get them on board. And if in HR we don't start something where we ensure that people who get management roles already have the capability to fulfill that requirement, we are going to be in serious trouble. And we demand for excellent talent is increasing at the same time that the available talent is decreasing. And of course we're seeing the impact, as I say, of cross-cultural. It's cheery, isn't it, don't you think? So these are the challenges we face. And I thought Jack Welch summed it when he said, one of the things we've got to realize is that whilst restructuring and reorganizing matters, it is not what changes people. So yes, of course, we've got to help our organizations restructure. I mean, HR, we're good at that, aren't we? I mean, we keep restructuring ourselves. We practice on ourselves. But that in itself is not what's going to solve the problem. So what are we seeing in terms of global HR trends in the profession? What we're seeing is this demographic imbalance means that organizations are now having to focus much more on global issues. We need to understand what we might need in America in 3 years' time, and is there any probability that those people will be available in China? It's a fundamentally different mindset. Talent management is becoming much more integrated. I've even got an organization in Houston where they ask people to go out and find potential talent that they might recruit in a year or 2 years' time, and they have formal processes where they connect with those people. They'll pay the employees to go to the same gym as somebody they might want to recruit in a year's time to find out what are their interests, what do they like, what are they being paid, would they be prepared to move. So we're thinking beyond now just recruiting through agencies. Talent acquisition, therefore, expand. It's forcing major changes. So not just recruiting through the internet, but recruiting through the social networking groups, through LinkedIn, through Facebook, through Twitter. We're seeing equally performance management undergoing major changes. Performance management is not January, what are we going to do? Chug, 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 chug. December, did we do it? That no longer drives. The business plan probably changed 3 times during the year. So performance management is about real time. And this afternoon we'll talk about some of the HR advances in technology. And social everything. We have to understand now that, and again, Israel is one of the cultures where I think you have a real opportunity. The one thing I learned many, many years ago when I had the privilege of coming here first was how powerful the social networks here are. You have that skill. It's built in that you connect with people. Do not believe that that happens anywhere else in the world. But it's a real advantage. You of all have the ability to understand the contemporary power of networking and communications because socially it's ingrained in your culture. But it's a huge lever that we can use. We're seeing reappraisal of award and compensation. You know, you cannot have annual increases when organizations' budgets are decreasing in many parts of the world. And then we're seeing maximum discretionary performance. It's all about getting